The heavy brass key snapped in my trembling hand, the jagged edge biting deep into my skin. But that sharp sting was nothing compared to the agony tearing through my freshly stitched chest. I had just survived a grueling open-heart surgery, practically begging the doctors to release me early, so I wouldn't be a financial or emotional burden to my only son, Julien. Yet, as I stood on the porch of the modest suburban home I had bought for him, shivering in the freezing November rain, the realization hit me with the force of a freight train. The lock hadn't just jammed, it had been entirely replaced. Through the pouring rain, my eyes drifted to the overflowing trash cans at the edge of the driveway. Soaked in mud and discarded like meaningless garbage were my meager belongings. And right at the top, shattered under a greasy pizza box, was the framed photograph of my late husband. "Mum, don't make a scene." Julian's voice suddenly echoed from the porch camera speaker above my head, thick with irritation rather than concern. "Chloe and I need this house for collateral, and you're just..." I stared up at the blinking red light of the camera, the icy rain plastering my graying hair to my face, my breath coming in shallow, painful rasps. "Julien, it's freezing out here," I wheezed, clutching my thin coat over my bandaged chest, where my heart pounded a frantic, terrified rhythm. "I just got out of the intensive care unit. Please, just open the door." But instead of my son's footsteps rushing to help me, I heard the unmistakable, high-pitched giggle of his fiancée, Chloe. Drifting through the cheap speaker, "Tell her to go to that state-run facility downtown." Chloe's voice sneered in the background, laced with venom. "We can't have a sick old woman coughing around here when the investors come over for the dinner party." Julien cleared his throat, his tone hardening with absolute, chilling detachment. "You heard her? Mom, I'm on the verge of securing a $50 million investment for my tech firm. I can't let your medical bills or your depressing presence ruin my aesthetic or my credit score. Take a cab to the public shelter. We've already transferred the deed. And honestly, you're just a walking corpse waiting to die, anyway." The speaker clicked off, plunging me back into the silent roar of the storm. Leaving me utterly alone on the porch I had meticulously swept and cared for over the years. A mother's instinct is naturally to forgive, to make desperate excuses, to believe that her child is simply misguided by stress or bad influences. But as a fresh wave of blinding pain shot through my sternum, the warm, unconditional love I had harbored for Julien completely died. I had stepped back into the shadows, living a frugal, unassuming life in this quaint neighborhood, just so my son could learn the value of hard work and true independence. I had intentionally hidden my world of extreme wealth from him, wanting him to build his own legacy without the suffocating shadow of my massive corporate success. But watching my dear husband's smiling face get ruined by the dirty rainwater, I realized my immense sacrifice hadn't bred a strong, independent man. It had bred an entitled, heartless monster. I wiped the mixture of raindrops and bitter tears from my pale cheeks, my trembling hands slowly steadying as a cold, terrifying clarity washed over my breaking heart. Leaning heavily against the wet brick wall to keep from collapsing, I fumbled for my phone with numb fingers, completely ignoring the fresh blood that had begun to seep through my bandages and stain my white blouse. Julien thought he had just outsmarted a helpless, destitute widow, easily discarding the frail woman who had wiped his childhood tears and funded his early, Foolish dreams. He firmly believed that the $50 million lifeline he was so desperately relying on was going to come from a faceless venture capitalist, an angel investor who would finally elevate him to the billionaire status he so greedily craved. What my arrogant, foolish son didn't know was that the very investment fund he had staked his entire future on, the prestigious Sterling Vanguard, belonged entirely to me. I wasn't just a sick old woman begging for a warm bed at his door. I was the invisible hand that fed him. And with one simple phone call, I was about to become the merciless hand that would crush his pathetic empire into dust. The chilling rain felt like 1,000 needles piercing through my fragile skin, but the agonizing burn radiating from my freshly sutured chest was a stark reminder of my mortality. Every ragged breath I drew felt like swallowing broken glass, my lungs fighting against the biting November wind as I huddled under the meager shelter of the porch awning. For 30 years, I had played the role of the devoted, self-sacrificing mother, carefully hiding my immense wealth and the brutal reality of the corporate world to give Julian a life of innocent normalcy. I had spent countless nights sewing his Halloween costumes, attending every mundane school play, and pouring my soul into molding him into a man of honor, completely oblivious to the rotting entitlement festering within his core. Now, the very boy whose scraped knees I had kissed better was leaving me to freeze to death on the concrete, prioritizing a lavish dinner party and a shallow, gold-digging fiancé over the very life of the woman who birthed him. The physical trauma of the open-heart surgery was devastating, but the sheer, unfathomable betrayal from my own flesh and blood was the true fatal blow. My phone vibrated violently in my damp pocket, snapping me out of my agonizing reverie with a harsh jolt. Pulling the screen into the dim porch light, I saw a rapid succession of messages lighting up the shattered glass, all from Chloe's number. She had sent a series of high-resolution photos, each one a calculated, vicious dagger aimed directly at my breaking heart. The images showed Julian taking a sledgehammer to the beautiful vintage vanity I had cherished for decades. The delicate wood splintered and destroyed to make room for what Chloe's caption gleefully described as her new walk-in designer closet. Another photo showed my carefully preserved collection of classic novels being unceremoniously dumped into heavy black trash bags, accompanied by a voice note that auto-played with devastating clarity, just making sure the trash takes itself out. Chloe's voice purred with sickening sweetness, followed by Julian's cruel, agreeing laughter echoing in the background. Don't bother sitting on the porch all night. Eleanor, the sprinklers are set to go off in 10 minutes. And frankly, you're ruining the curb appeal for our VIP investors tomorrow. As the voice note ended, a profound, deafening silence settled over my mind, silencing the desperate, weeping mother inside me, once and for all. The blinding, pathetic urge to forgive, to make excuses for my son's unspeakable cruelty, evaporated into the cold night air like mist, replaced by a terrifying, absolute, emotional void. I had spent years meticulously building the Sterling Vanguard empire, earning a formidable reputation in the ruthless financial district as a brilliant, unforgiving predator who devoured weak companies and dismantled arrogant CEOs. I had locked that terrifying, powerful version of myself in a cage to be a soft, nurturing parent, foolishly believing that love alone could conquer greed looking at the pathetic ruins of my life scattered on the wet driveway. I finally understood that my endless generosity had not nurtured a son. It had simply fattened a parasite, the frail, forgiving widow named Eleanor, who baked pies and wore thrift store cardigans, died on that freezing porch. And from her ashes rose the undisputed, ruthless matriarch of high finance, ready to reclaim her throne. With a newfound, terrifying stillness, I wiped the rainwater from my phone screen, pulling up a private, encrypted contact that I had not dialed in almost 5 years. The line rang only once before it was answered. The deep, impeccably professional voice of Marcus, my fiercely loyal right-hand man and the chief legal counsel of my empire, filling my ear. "Madame Sterling, we were informed of your early discharge. Are you safe?" he asked, his tone instantly shifting from polite inquiry to sharp, protective alertness as he heard the shuddering of my breath and the howling storm in the background. "Marcus, I need extraction immediately at the suburban property, and I need you to bring the armored Maybach," I commanded, my voice stripping away every ounce of elderly frailty, ringing out with the icy, authoritative precision of a reigning monarch. "Bring a medical team to stabilize my chest wounds. And once I am secure, I need you to pull up every single unredacted file, every financial projection, and every hidden debt regarding Julian's tech startup. It seems my son is in desperate need of a harsh lesson in basic economics, and I am going to personally bankrupt him." "Understood, Madame. We will be at your location in precisely 8 minutes," Marcus replied, without a single moment of hesitation, the absolute loyalty in his voice acting as a soothing balm to my battered soul. As I waited in the dark, the automatic lawn sprinklers hissed to life, just as Chloe had maliciously promised, spraying freezing water over my legs and further soaking my blood-stained blouse. But I no longer felt the cold. I stood tall, my spine straightening despite the searing agony in my sternum, my eyes fixed intently on the glowing windows of the living room where my oblivious son was celebrating his imaginary victory. Exactly 8 minutes later, a convoy of 3 sleek, imposing black SUVs silently glided down the quiet suburban street, stopping with menacing precision right in front of the driveway. The heavy doors of the lead Maybach swung open, and Marcus stepped out into the storm, holding a massive black umbrella. His sharp, tailored suit, a stark contrast to the dreary neighborhood, his eyes flashing with dangerous fury as he took in my pathetic, drenched state. A team of discreet, highly trained private paramedics rushed forward, immediately wrapping me in thick, heated thermal blankets and gently guiding my trembling body into the luxurious, heavily armored interior of the vehicle. As the plush leather seats embraced me and the advanced climate control chased away the biting chill of the rain, Marcus personally handed me a steaming cup of Earl Grey tea, his expression completely unreadable, but his loyalty palpable. "The estate in Highcliffe has been prepped for your arrival, and the medical wing is fully operational," he informed me smoothly, already tapping rapidly on a sleek encrypted tablet. I took a slow, agonizing sip of the tea, letting the warmth spread through my chest as I turned to look out the tinted, bulletproof window at the miserable little house. One last time, Julian and Chloe's silhouettes danced happily across the curtains. utterly clueless that the very god of their impending destruction had just been sitting on their welcome mat. Let them enjoy their little party. "Marcus," I whispered, my voice dripping with lethal, calculated venom, because by the time I am finished with them, they won't even be able to afford the cardboard boxes they throw their belongings into. The convoy pulled away from the curb, leaving the muddy driveway and my ruined belongings far behind in the rearview mirror. A final, definitive severing of the maternal bond I had clung to for so long. As we glided smoothly onto the desolate highway leading toward the exclusive, heavily fortified district of Highcliffe, I instructed the medical team to administer a mild painkiller, just enough to dull the physical agony of my surgical wounds without clouding my razor-sharp mind. Marcus sat silently across from me, his fingers flying across the tablet screen as he rapidly aggregated the financial dossiers I had demanded, the glow of the device illuminating his stoic features in the darkened cabin. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, visualizing the intricate, high-stakes chessboard of the corporate world, meticulously plotting every brutal, devastating move I was about to make against my own flesh and blood. Julian had foolishly believed that kicking a sick, helpless widow to the curb would be the effortless start to his glorious, wealthy future, completely unaware that he had just declared war on a ruthless titan who held his very existence in the palm of her hand. The imposing wrought-iron gates of the Highcliffe estate glided open silently, a stark contrast to the jammed, pathetic lock that had barred me from my own suburban home just an hour ago. As the armored Maybach swept up the sprawling, pristine driveway lined with centuries-old oak trees, the sheer magnitude of my hidden life loomed before me. The Sterling Manor, a colossal architectural masterpiece of dark stone and towering glass windows, stood as an impenetrable fortress against the raging storm, a physical manifestation of the immense power I had painstakingly accumulated over 3 decades. The moment the vehicle came to a halt under the grand portico, a highly coordinated team of private physicians and specialized nurses swarmed the car, their faces tight with professional urgency as they transferred me into a waiting wheelchair. I was swiftly navigated through the opulent, marble-floored corridors of my home, bypassing the grand ballroom and the priceless art collections, heading straight for the state-of-the-art medical wing I had installed years ago, as the doctors carefully removed my soaked, blood-stained garments and began meticulously cleaning the irritated sutures across my sternum. The searing physical pain grounded me, burning away the last lingering remnants of the pathetic, weeping mother who had begged for shelter on a concrete porch. Lying back on the sterile, heated examination table, I watched the heart monitor track my steadying pulse, the rhythmic beeping a testament to my survival and my hardening resolve. Marcus stood silently in the corner of the room, his sharp eyes respectfully averted, while the medical team finished applying a fresh, heavy-duty bandage to my chest and administered a customized cocktail of intravenous antibiotics and mild pain relievers. Once the head physician gave a firm nod of approval and discreetly cleared the room, leaving only the 2 of us in the quiet, clinical space. The atmosphere instantly shifted from medical recovery to a deadly corporate war room. Marcus stepped forward into the harsh, bright light, his perfectly tailored suit immaculate, holding a sleek, secure tablet that contained the digital blueprint of my ungrateful son's entire miserable existence. "The medical team assures me you are out of immediate danger. Madame Sterling," though they strongly advise profound rest," Marcus stated smoothly, his deep voice carrying a lethal undertone as he handed me the glowing device. However, I took the liberty of compiling the complete financial dossier on Julian's tech startup, Nexus Innovations, precisely as you requested during our transit. I adjusted the plush pillows behind my back, ignoring the dull, persistent throb in my chest as I swiped open the heavily encrypted file, my eyes scanning the complex spreadsheets and legal documents with the practiced, predatory speed of a veteran venture capitalist. Julian had built his company on a fragile, precarious foundation of reckless borrowing and aggressive, unsustainable expansion, desperately trying to project an image of a Silicon Valley prodigy while secretly drowning in short-term liabilities. The most damning document, however, was the collateral agreement he had recently submitted to a secondary lender to keep his sinking ship afloat until the major venture capital injection arrived. My breath hitched, not from physical pain, but from a wave of profound, icy disgust as I realized my son had brazenly forged my signature to transfer the deed of the suburban house entirely into his name. He had illegally leveraged the very roof I had provided for him, completely oblivious to the fact that the original deed was legally bound to the Sterling Vanguard Shadow Trust, making his clumsy forgery not just a betrayal, but a severe, prosecutable federal crime. He believes he has outsmarted a senile, dying woman, I murmured softly, my voice devoid of any maternal warmth, sounding completely foreign even to my own ears as I traced the jagged lines of his fraudulent signature. Marcus leaned closer, tapping the edge of the screen to switch the display from the dry, damning financial records to a live, high-definition social media feed. It appears Mr. Sterling and his fiancée are currently broadcasting their perceived victory to the world, completely unaware of the precarious cliff they are dancing upon, Marcus noted dryly, pulling up Chloe's heavily manicured, verified Instagram account. The screen filled with vibrant, chaotic footage of a lavish, loud dinner party taking place in the very living room I had been violently exiled from. The space now crowded with pretentious investors and shallow socialites, clutching expensive champagne flutes. Chloe was twirling in a hideous, ostentatious designer gown, loudly slurring her words as she boasted to the camera about how they had finally cleared out the vintage trash to modernize the property, her wicked laughter grating against my frayed nerves like sandpaper. The camera hastily panned across the crowded, noisy room and aggressively zoomed in on Julian, who was standing confidently by the grand fireplace I had painstakingly built with my late husband, holding a crystal glass high in the air to command the attention of his sycophantic guests, to Nexus Innovations, and to the brilliant, self-made future we are all building together, Julian announced loudly, his handsome face flushed with expensive liquor and unearned arrogance, his voice completely devoid of the boyish innocence I used to cherish. They say that to reach the absolute top, you have to be willing to cut dead weight and trim the fat, no matter how much it protests or clings to you. Today, Chloe and I finally removed the heaviest, most toxic burden holding this family back. And tomorrow, we secure our $50 million crown. The crowd erupted into wild, oblivious applause, clinking their glasses in ignorant celebration of a son openly bragging about leaving his freshly operated, critically ill mother to freeze to death in a thunderstorm. A suffocating silence fell over the medical wing as the video abruptly ended. The sheer, unadulterated cruelty of his words hanging heavily in the sterile air, completely severing the final, fragile thread of my broken heart. For 30 agonizing years, I had deliberately suppressed the ruthless, formidable shark that conquered Wall Street, choosing instead to bake cookies, attend mundane parent-teacher conferences, and play the role of the soft, unremarkable widow just to give him a normal, grounded childhood. I had locked away my billions, hiding my terrifying influence behind cheap cardigans and modest suburban homes, foolishly believing that a life free from the corrupting taint of extreme wealth would forge a man of integrity and deep, unwavering compassion. Instead, my monumental sacrifice had only nurtured a fragile, entitled narcissist who felt completely justified in stepping over his mother's bleeding body to grasp at a mirage of power he lacked the intelligence to actually maintain. I stared at the blank screen of the tablet, feeling a cold, dark power rushing back into my veins. A familiar, intoxicating ruthlessness that I had forcibly buried alongside my beloved late husband. I was no longer Eleanor, the pathetic, discarded mother. I was Eleanor Sterling, the undisputed, terrifying apex predator of the financial world. And it was time to show my pathetic prey exactly whose ocean they were swimming in. Marcus, I said, my tone completely devoid of emotion, striking the air with the cold, heavy finality of a judge's gavel as I handed the tablet back to my stoic confidant. Contact the executive board of Sterling Vanguard immediately and order them to halt the final transfer of the $50 million funding package for Nexus Innovations. Citing a sudden, severe breach of our ethical conduct clauses, Marcus nodded sharply, his fingers already flying across his own encrypted device. A dangerous, anticipating smirk playing at the very edges of his disciplined mouth. Furthermore, I continued, my voice dropping to a lethal, icy whisper. I want you to notify the secondary lenders about the fraudulent deed. Trigger the immediate acceleration clause on all of his hidden, short-term debts, and prepare the immediate eviction notices for the suburban property. Tomorrow morning, when Julian struts into our downtown headquarters, expecting to sign his triumphant billionaire contract, I want him completely legally cornered, financially ruined, and staring directly into the eyes of his executioner. It shall be done perfectly, madame, down to the last devastating detail. Marcus replied with unwavering loyalty, bowing his head slightly before turning on his heel and striding purposefully out of the medical wing to orchestrate the immediate destruction of my son's life. Left completely alone in the sprawling, quiet room, I slowly stood up from the examination table, my legs trembling slightly from the physical exertion, but my spirit completely encased in impenetrable, frozen steel. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the massive, manicured grounds of my hidden estate, the violent storm outside finally beginning to break, revealing the cold, harsh light of a full moon piercing through the dark, churning clouds. Julian wanted a brutal, unforgiving world of high-stakes power and limitless money, completely disregarding the blood and tears required to actually survive in such a merciless, shark-infested environment. He had brutally demanded my complete absence from his life. And tomorrow, I was going to grant his arrogant wish in the most spectacular, devastating way possible, erasing his entire existence from the map. The morning sun gleamed off the towering glass facade of the Sterling Vanguard headquarters, a monolithic skyscraper that dominated the city's financial district and served as the impenetrable fortress of my empire. Up in the penthouse boardroom, sitting at the head of a massive, custom-built obsidian table, my arrogant son and his insufferable fiancée were currently treating my executive staff with the condescending disdain of newly crowned royalty. Through the secure, high-definition camera feed broadcasting directly to my private suite at Highcliffe, I watched with cold, clinical detachment as Julian confidently adjusted his expensive, bespoke Italian suit, completely oblivious to the financial guillotine dangling by a thread right above his perfectly styled hair. Chloe was busy taking a series of obnoxious, highly filtered selfies in the plush leather executive chairs, loudly complaining to a stoic paralegal about the temperature of her artisan espresso and demanding a finer vintage of celebratory champagne. They truly believed they had conquered the ruthless world of venture capitalism, firmly convinced that leaving me to die on a frozen porch was the brilliant, necessary sacrifice that had magically paved their golden road to unimaginable wealth. The heavy, soundproof mahogany doors of the boardroom suddenly swung open, instantly silencing Chloe's shrill complaints and causing Julian to eagerly leap to his feet with a perfectly practiced, sycophantic smile plastered across his face. However, instead of the mysterious, benevolent billionaire investor they were desperately expecting to greet them, Marcus strode into the room with terrifying, militaristic precision. Flawlessly flanked by 6 of my most aggressive corporate litigators and 2 heavily armed security contractors, Julian's practiced smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of genuine confusion crossing his eyes before his towering arrogance quickly reasserted itself, foolishly assuming this intimidating parade was merely the standard, dramatic protocol for a $50 million acquisition. The legal cavalry has finally arrived to finalize the paperwork, Julian announced with a booming, overly confident laugh, eagerly extending his hand across the gleaming obsidian table toward my fiercely loyal right-hand man. Marcus did not take the offered hand, nor did he offer even the slightest hint of professional courtesy. He simply stood at the opposite end of the table, like a grim executioner, his dark eyes radiating absolute, freezing contempt. Mr. Sterling, there will be no celebratory paperwork signed today, nor will there be any capital injected into your fundamentally broken, fraudulent company, Marcus stated, his deep voice slicing through the tense air of the boardroom with the lethal precision of a surgical scalpel. He deliberately bypassed Julian's outstretched hand and violently slammed a thick, red-stamped dossier onto the pristine glass surface. The harsh, echoing crack, making Chloe physically jump in her seat and spill her expensive espresso, acting under the direct, unyielding orders of the Sterling Vanguard Executive Board. I am hereby officially terminating the $50 million term sheet for Nexus Innovations, effective immediately. Citing egregious violations of our mandatory moral conduct and ethical business clauses, Julian's face instantly drained of all color, his arrogant bravado shattering into a million pieces as a terrifying, desperate panic flooded his widened eyes. unable to comprehend how his guaranteed golden ticket had just been set on fire. "You can't do this." "We have a legally binding preliminary agreement," Julian screamed, his voice cracking with sheer terror as he aggressively pounded his fists against the table. His carefully constructed facade of a brilliant CEO completely disintegrating. "You invalidated any preliminary protections the exact moment you committed a severe federal crime by violently forging the property deed of your mother's suburban home to secure secondary, high-risk loans." Marcus countered smoothly, his tone utterly devoid of mercy as he began dealing the final, fatal blows. He methodically slid 3 more crisp, terrifyingly official documents across the table, each one a nail in the coffin of Julian's pathetic, fraudulent existence because of your blatant, undeniable forgery. "Our financial auditors have triggered the immediate acceleration clauses on all of your hidden, short-term corporate debts, making Nexus Innovations entirely insolvent and legally bankrupt as of exactly 8 minutes ago." Chloe let out a piercing, hysterical shriek, her perfectly contoured face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror as Marcus calmly placed the final document right in front of her trembling, manicured hands. "Furthermore, the suburban property you are currently illegally occupying belongs exclusively to the Sterling Vanguard Shadow Trust. And this is your formal, non-negotiable notice of immediate, forceful eviction," Marcus concluded coldly, motioning for the heavily armed security contractors to step forward into the harsh light. The opulent, high-tech boardroom felt like a suffocating vacuum as Julian completely collapsed back into his chair, his breathing shallow and frantic as the catastrophic reality of his total, irreversible destruction finally crashed down upon him. He was drowning in millions of dollars of suddenly accelerated debt, facing imminent federal prosecution for real estate forgery, and actively being thrown onto the street by the very venture capital firm he thought was his supreme savior. "Who is responsible for this absolute nightmare?" Julian gasped out, tears of sheer panic and furious disbelief streaming down his pale cheeks as he desperately snatched up the final rejection decree. "I demand to speak to the chairman of this entire fund right now. I demand to know who is maliciously ruining my life." Marcus simply adjusted his tie with immaculate grace, a cold, predatory smirk finally breaking through his stoic facade as he nodded toward the bottom of the glowing document. Julian's bloodshot eyes darted down to the official, heavily embossed signature line, his entire body convulsing violently as he read the name of the undisputed, multi-billionaire founder and CEO of Sterling Vanguard, Eleanor Sterling. 3 days after the apocalyptic boardroom meeting, the bitter November chill had hardened into the season's first violent snowstorm, blanketing the city in an unforgiving layer of frost. For Julian and Chloe, those 72 hours had been a rapid, agonizing descent into absolute hell, with their corporate accounts completely frozen and their personal assets immediately seized by the secondary lenders they had defrauded. Their glamorous illusion of wealth evaporated overnight. The eviction from the suburban house had been swift and brutal. My private security contractors had given them exactly 15 minutes to pack whatever fit into 2 suitcases before physically escorting them off the premises. Their so-called high society friends, the very investors who had eagerly clinked champagne glasses in my ruined living room, completely abandoned them. The second, the news of the federal forgery investigation leaked to the financial press. Stripped of his CEO title, facing imminent criminal charges, and drowning in mountains of unpayable debt, My arrogant son was abruptly and violently introduced to the harsh, merciless reality he had so proudly claimed to conquer. Desperation is a powerful, degrading force, stripping away every ounce of false pride and revealing the pathetic, shivering core of a person. By hacking into old family tax records and tracing the labyrinthine corporate ownership of the Sterling Vanguard Shadow Trust, Julian had finally discovered the heavily guarded location of my true residence. As the violent blizzard raged on outside, blanketing the sprawling Highcliffe estate in blinding white snow, the perimeter breach alarms softly chimed inside my private penthouse suite. I stood on the heated marble floor of my grand balcony, wrapped in a luxurious cashmere shawl, sipping a steaming cup of Earl Grey tea as I looked down through the reinforced glass. There, kneeling in the freezing, muddy sludge just outside the towering wrought-iron gates of my fortress, was the very man who had callously ordered me to crawl into a public shelter to die. Julian's expensive Italian suit was soaked and ruined, his face pale and contorted with sheer agony as he desperately gripped the icy metal bars, shaking them with bare, bleeding hands. Mom, please. I know you're in there, Julian's pathetic, fractured voice barely pierced through the howling winds of the blizzard. Carried up to my balcony via the advanced external security microphones, he fell heavily to his knees in the deep snow, sobbing uncontrollably, the sheer magnitude of his catastrophic ruin finally breaking his fragile, entitled mind. I'm so sorry. Mom, I was blind. I was stressed. Chloe manipulated me into doing those terrible things. Please. Just open the gate. Don't let me freeze out here. I have absolutely nothing left behind him. Shivering uncontrollably in a thin designer coat, Chloe stood crying dark, mascara-stained tears. No longer the vicious, arrogant woman who had gleefully destroyed my late husband's photograph. They looked exactly like the helpless, discarded trash they had treated me as just a few days prior, completely at the mercy of the punishing elements and the terrifying, silent judgment of my estate. Hearing my son cry out for me sent a phantom pang echoing through the fading surgical scar on my chest. A fleeting, ghost-like reminder of the unconditional maternal love that had permanently died on that rainy porch. I set my exquisite porcelain teacup down on the small table beside me, my expression utterly devoid of pity, and pressed the intercom button that connected directly to the front gate speakers. It is fascinating, Julian, how quickly your ruthless, self-made billionaire philosophy crumbles the moment you are the one standing out in the freezing cold. My voice echoed out into the snowy night, amplified and godlike, making him flinch violently, as if physically struck. 3 days ago, you clearly dictated the terms of our relationship. You explicitly stated that I was nothing more than a toxic burden, a walking corpse that was holding you back from your glorious destiny. Julian openly wept, burying his freezing face against the unforgiving iron bars, his desperate apologies tumbling out in pathetic, unintelligible gasps as he begged for a second chance, for forgiveness, for the mother he had so violently thrown away. You wanted to cut the dead weight, Julian, and you succeeded perfectly. I continued, my tone dropping to a chilling, absolute finality that sliced right through the blinding blizzard. You are no longer my son. You are simply a bankrupt, fraudulent stranger, trespassing on my private property. Marcus, I said calmly, releasing the intercom button and turning toward my loyal counsel who stood quietly in the shadows of the opulent suite, silently observing the pathetic scene on the security monitors. Inform the local authorities that we have vagrants aggressively harassing the perimeter, and instruct the gate guards to absolutely not engage or open those doors under any circumstances. Marcus bowed respectfully, his dark eyes reflecting a deep, silent satisfaction as he immediately relayed the harsh orders through his earpiece, firmly sealing my son's dark, inescapable fate. I turned my back on the massive glass windows, completely tuning out the faint, muffled screams of the broken man kneeling in the snow, and walked slowly toward the massive, roaring fireplace in the center of the room. The agonizing physical pain in my chest had finally subsided, replaced by a profound, unshakable peace and a deeply liberating sense of absolute emotional freedom. I had spent my entire life shrinking myself down to build a pedestal for a monster. But as the warmth of the fire embraced me, I finally stepped into the brilliant, unforgiving light of my own empire, perfectly content to reign entirely alone.